co-directing one of the WORIC international networks, which is the MITN network, standing for Migration, Identity and Translation, which is under the WORIC Monash Alliance. What MITN wants to do is to support a whole range of different initiatives, but it has a multidisciplinary orientation, and it wants to facilitate events that bring different people together. Now, on that front, my own research is around mobilities and immobilities and crossing borders and boundaries, which very much fits with, of course, the agenda of the network. And we also have another very important network, if you want, or space, which is the WORIC has a range of what are called our GRPs, the Global Research Priorities, which are around core societal issues that, again, are deeply multidisciplinary in nature, but they bring together researchers and scholars who are interested. And one of them is the Connecting Cultures GRP, and I'm a member, and Paolo's colleague directing. And that is an obvious synergy between the GRP and MITN, particularly around the topic that we're going to discuss today. And Paolo also has recently completed, or is in the process of completing, a project which was particularly focused on Syrian refugees in our area, and we'll hear more about that. So what we're trying to do, it's a very informal, interactive, bring together a group of people who share interests, come from different disciplinary backgrounds, have had different theoretical and methodological positionings in relation to engaging with the issue, but where there is potential for creating some synergies. We want the day to be interactive. We are obviously kind of we are going to hear some very latest thinking from our core speakers, but it's also very important that we facilitate discussion amongst us and the audience, so that's part of it. So it's not meant to be a day where we actually sit back, some people talk at us, and then we just all go home, because that's against the whole spirit of it. We will have some more people joining us during the day, staying for as long as they can. And hopefully we will have a lot of ongoing and discussions, and then something will come out of it. On that, Paolo and I are working with Emmanuel as well. We're working on the idea of developing a volume, a multidisciplinary volume, which will bring together again some of the contributions we have today. Because there is a lot of talk around multidisciplinarity, but there are very few spaces where we can actually have very different types of contributions under the same roof. And I think everybody in this room is very committed to supporting this agenda, which is very, very important. So this day is hopefully a time and space for us all to share interests, and will lead to more and other activities as well. We need to acknowledge Emmanuel's work, which has been great in actually bringing it together, and Christina and Kumi as well helps a lot. I think we don't need to say much more on that.
Thank you very much, Joe. I'll be even briefer, if I may. The project that started this was an AHRC funded small project, and Emmanuel and Riem, who's here, were the ones who did the real work, and we will be hearing from both of them later on. But obviously we are talking about expanding this and trying to make it wider. I find that at the moment Europe is really at the crossroads. I'm not saying anything new, and we are redefining what it might mean to be European, and I think that at the very core of that question is the issue of migration, all forms of migration. So I do think that the humanities and the social sciences have an absolutely essential role to fulfill. This is formal and informal at the same time. Formal because we do want to produce protocols that will be useful for other people. Informal because we are a group of colleagues, friends. Some of us know each other for a long time, others are more recent acquaintances, and I am hoping and trusting that we will be developing along the day a lot of synergy. At the moment, it's my great pleasure and honor to introduce Professor António Sousa Ribeiro, who has kindly decided to take a tiny few days off his busy schedule to come to us. He is a leading professor of German studies. I would even dare say perhaps the leading professor of German studies in Portugal, with a very long established and distinguished record of publication and intervention. He is also someone who has been at the forefront of academic renewal and is responsible for many projects that have shifted the academy in Portugal. I would also like to mention that he is someone who is deeply involved in ideas of modernity and of questions of trauma. He has also published extensively in international journals and books on those two subjects, and he leads the research component of what is a unique institute in Portugal, and that is the Center for Social Studies at the University of Coimbra, which was founded by Professor Boaventura de Sousa Santos, whom I think you might have heard of, and who is still a highly respected scholar and critic. And I think that the work of that center, which is considerably very large center, very successful in terms of publication and financing. Yesterday I was told it has at the moment 140 researchers, and who also runs its own PhD programs, attracting young people from basically all over the world. They are not limited at all to Europe or even the US. And he's going to start us rolling. António?
Thank you very much, Paul, for your most kind introduction. You have, of course, to consider that such introductions always exaggerate somehow, but I'm very grateful for my... we have come some way together, me and Paul, in previous years, so it is really a great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. Well, not being a specialist in migration studies, I tried to put together some thoughts that I thought might be useful for this meeting. I hope this has been the case. And I'll read the paper I prepared, and which will be about 40 minutes, not longer than that. And then we may perhaps exchange some thoughts and have some discussion. I gave my paper the title, Translating and Being Translated, Some Thoughts on Discourse and Migration. I have a vivid recollection of a late afternoon in Vienna, some 20 years ago, when I had the opportunity of attending a public lecture by the renowned social linguist Ruth Wodak. There was a very large audience of several hundred people. The talk was taking place at the huge festival hall of the Viennese Town Hall in the framework of the so-called Vienna Lectures, an official event for the general public sponsored by the municipality. Ruth Wodak was presenting the results of her research projects on the discursive construction of Austrian identity. In the final part of the session, there was the customary period for questions and answers. Everything was proceeding as was to be expected until someone from the audience asked the question, do you think that immigrants who want to apply for Austrian citizenship should be obliged to present proof of fluency in German? The answer came straight away, without the slightest hesitation. No, I don't. As an observer and a foreigner, I was particularly struck by the turmoil among the audience and the aggressive atmosphere immediately triggered by this answer. The question had undoubtedly touched some sensitive nerve. An elderly gentleman, who seems particularly outraged, made a point of quoting the Austrian national author Grillparzer on the defining value of language for the Austrian nation, thus making clear that the source for the general commotion lay in the deep-seated equation between national belonging and sharing of a mother tongue, and the equally deep-seated mistrust against any transgression of a notion of assimilation grounded in the terms offered by the dominant logic of the nation. Now, of course, Ruth Wodak was in no way denying the value and importance of learning the language to be able to live and work in a new environment. She was, however, being sharply critical of what she perceived as the establishment of a legal requirement that would stand in the way of fundamental values and human rights. In a later essay, she writes with polemical verve that language tests have become the modern border guards, functioning as a kind of admission ticket to the promised land. And she reminds us that as opposed to cosmopolitanism or post-nationalism as landmarks of a European citizenship, I quote, the concept of mother tongue and the return to national language policies which essentialize the nation-state, projecting a homogeneous culture, language and territory, relates to nativist body politics of viewing and conceptualizing the nation as a body with the mother tongue symbolizing the national language. End of quotation. There was, however, I think, another important point that Hofstadter wanted to make by refusing to fulfill the expectations of her audience. She was implicitly stressing that mastering the language would not automatically cancel the myriad of other factors of discrimination operative in Austrian society, as in other European societies, against migrants of different provenances. In other words, she was pointing to the fact that being translated implied much deeper problems than a simple demand for, for assimilation was completely unable to deal with. I was reminded of this telling episode while trying to put together some thoughts on the relevance of the concept of translation for questions concerning the connection of discourse and migration. It was an occasion when it became painfully clear to me how a mythical conception of the national language was functioning in the given context as a powerful operator for getting hold of what in a recent book on violent borders, Rhys Jones has named the invasion complex. Proof of language proficiency clearly would not provide just by itself any guarantee of integration in the Austrian society. However, in the collective imaginary, this demand somehow seemed to offer a sense of security, a taming of the fear of the heterogeneous. As a sign of unity, the national language clearly could provide the illusion of a well-defined, secure border surrounding an essentially safe haven. Since that occasion in Vienna at the end of the millennium, the scale and nature of forced mobilities have of course dramatically changed, particularly in the wake of the so-called refugee crisis. Not the least of the consequences has been to destabilize fixed meanings of the words refugee and migrant themselves. As is well known, the 1951 United Nations Convention on Refugees provided a very narrow definition, since it gave the signatory states the option of defining refugee as a victim, I quote, of events occurring in Europe before January 1st, 1951, thus restricting the scope of the concept in the main to the consequences of Nazism and the Second World War in Europe. The convention was revised in 1967 to remove the geographic and temporal limitations. Still, the definition of the condition of refugee as applied to someone who had to flee his or her country of origin, I quote, owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group or political opinion, end of quotation, as opposed to the migrant who is supposed to have voluntarily moved to a different country, tends to blur the simple fact that migrants who are moving for economic or environmental reasons are in many cases doing so not by choice, but because for a number of reasons, including ruthless exploitation of natural resources by Western big corporations, living conditions in their location of origin have become unbearable or even life-threatening. Although the scale is unprecedented, fundamental questions raised by the current situation are not essentially new and have to be understood in the framework of the longue durée of Europe's relation to its others. It is particularly striking in this regard that there should not be an awareness of the extent to which a definition of difference and a perception of difference in European discourse remain to this day caught within a frame of reference informed by the persistence of what Pascal Blanchard has named la fracture coloniale, the colonial fracture. This colonial fracture is framed by a long history of violent exclusion. the manifold ways in which such a memory strongly reverberates in today's perception should deserve much closer attention than has often been the case. Having in mind the remembrance of the Algerian War in France, the historian Benjamin Stora draws attention to what he calls transfert de mémoire, transfers of memory, which imply that an image of the enemy, consolidated in the context of the war, keeps being projected onto migrants coming from North Africa and, in general, to the large French Muslim population. New forms of differentiation and exclusion, especially as pertains to anti-Muslim resentment, feed from a history of violence closely associated with Europe's colonial past, which is why struggles for memory remain such a crucial element in the constitution of a democratic, cosmopolitan European public sphere. Whether on the level of the recovery of a nation-centric perspective or of a general notion of the West, fantasies of centrality continue to play a crucial role. In one of the founding texts of the European Union, Robert Schumann's declaration of May 9, 1950, putting forward the so-called Schuman Plan, there was a reference almost in passing that can easily be overlooked, but is quite telling.